Hey everyone, this is Nitro. In this video, I'm going to talk about how to build the main character of Legend of Heroes, Trails in the Sky, Estelle Bright. So, before I begin, I should say this. Estelle, being a Lancer tank character, if you already have a hero built up who is your tank, such as let's say a very powerful Ledin, like mine, I cannot recommend building up Estelle, who is just another tank. Now, if you don't have a tank built up, or you have her at like 5 or 6 stars because you've pulled a lot on the current banner, which is Bracer Blitz, then by all means build her up at that point. But if you only got her at 3 stars and then you're going to have to spend like let's say a month farming shards to get her up to 5 stars, then I can't recommend her, because the month you spend on farming shards for Estelle could be spent on building up someone else, such as Langrisser, who is like a reviving cavalry tank or something like that. So that's why, if you don't have her at a high star level, I can't recommend building her up. If you don't, then by all means. Alright, so with that warning given, let's talk about Estelle, and let's begin with her talent. Her talent is Maiden of Light, and what it does is, first, she'll take physical damage for nearby friendly units. Do note that this does not include magic attacks. Okay? It also grants the following effect after your active attacks deal damage. Increase your attack and defense by a certain percentage, increases guard range to 2 blocks, and this lasts for 2 turns. In addition to that, after taking action, increases the damage of allies within a certain number of increases the damage of a certain number of allies within a certain number of blocks by 10% for 2 rounds. Okay? So there's basically 3 parts to this talent. First, she naturally tanks hits for allies 1 block beside her. Second, if she attacks, her attack and defense is increased, and her guard range is increased to 2 blocks. Once again, she only guards against physical attacks. She does not guard against magic attacks. And then the final effect is that after taking action, if there's allies around her, they get a 10% damage increase for 2 rounds. So let's talk about the changes to her talent, okay? The first thing that changes is the attack and defense increase. It's 5% at 3 stars, 8% at 4 stars, 11% at 5 stars, and 15% increase at 6 stars. So 15% attack and defense increase, that's pretty significant. The second part that changes is her buff, okay? At 3 stars, it buffs 1 character, 4 stars becomes 2 characters, 5 stars becomes 3 characters, and then 6 stars, she buffs 4 allies, okay? And these allies need to be within 1 block of her at 3 stars, 2 blocks of her at 4 and 5 stars, and then 3 blocks of her at 6 stars. So it's just, this talent is with 3 different components. Does a little bit of everything, doesn't it, right? She guards and she buffs allies. It's it's really a very, very good talent, okay? Of course, the thing to note is, let's talk about her classes now. Or, sorry, let's talk about her skills and then her classes, okay? She starts off with the skill Whirlwind Staff. It deals 0.3 times AoE damage to all allies within 1 block, and gains Steel Titan for 2 turns. We'll talk about what Steel Titan does very shortly. But the range itself and the span is 1 block, right? And it has a 2-turn cooldown. The really nice thing about this skill really is just that it has a 1 cost. So that's why we would bring it. Alright, so that's her beginning skill. It's a solid skill at 1 point cost. Now, her starting skill, the skill that she picks up from her Bracer class is Steel Titan. So now we learn what Steel Titan does. It increases all damage by 10% and adds 10% of attack to defense. So the higher attack she has, the higher defense she has as well. It's a very, very nice ability, that Steel Titan. But the thing to note is you don't actually need the Steel Titan skill itself, because she actually has a lot of skills like Whirlwind Staff, which grants her Steel Titan. So just an interesting point to note. Alright, so that's her Bracer class. And in terms of choosing her class mastery, Estelle is actually quite interesting. As with every other character, if you're going to use her, you really should get both of her classes, get them both mastered. But the interesting thing about Estelle is her Sakura Supreme line basically gives her her PvE skills. Okay, whereas her General and Wave Crasher line gives her her PvP skills. Just a very interesting divide that you don't really see for very many characters. Okay, so let's talk about the PvE line first, and then we'll talk about the PvP line after that. So, from the PvE line, first there's Vanguard. Vanguard gives her Cheer, right? And Cheer is actually a lot like a faction buff, a mini faction buff, if you will. Okay? It's an assist type skill, of course. Range is herself, and it affects 6 blocks around her, so it's a huge radius. Okay? Cooldown of 6 turns, but the skill also lasts 6 turns. And what the skill does is it increases units' attack, int, defense, magic defense, and skills by 10.66%. It's a nice buff. Okay, so that is her Cheer skill. Sakura Supreme gives her Heavy Shield, 2 points, right? We've seen this skill on a lot of other tanks. When attacked with a melee attack, 25% chance to decrease damage taken by 50%. And the other skill is Armor Pierce. 1 block range, single target strike, 2 turns cooldown, where physical damage, attack a single enemy, dealing 1.5 times damage. After battle, decreases enemy's defense by 30%, and it lasts 2 turns. So, high damage, single target skill, right? And you also have Cheer, which is, it stacks well with faction buff. So, 2 great skills for PvE content in this single line, okay? In her general line, she gets access to, I cannot pronounce this word, Skein staff, okay? Attacks all enemies in the line, dealing 0.4 times AoE damage. It also grants Steel Titan for 2 turns. And this skill has a 5 block range. So it's 5 blocks as opposed to 6 blocks of Joshua. And it's hits straight in the line and a cooldown of 2 rounds. Great skill because, well, since she only has 3 movement, right? Estelle only has 3 movement. Having this skill, Skein Staff, allows you to attack very easily. Because you can move up 3 blocks, then use this skill to hit 5 blocks. So that's a total of 8 block range to hit enemies, right? And this is important because for her to actively guard within 2 blocks of her rather than just 1, she needs to attack and deal damage to an enemy. So that's why this skill is a very, very useful skill for Estelle. Alright, finally, let's talk about her Wave Crasher class. From Wave Crasher, she gets Detect. Crit chance increased by 10% when dealing damage, 50% chance to disable enemy passive skills. Lasts 2 turns, and there's a 100% chance of triggering when you land a crit hit. Now, in all honesty, in my opinion, you have a choice between, well, Detect, Steel Titan, or Whirlwind Staff, right? My personal opinion is Whirlwind Staff is the best of these 3. Because you always want her to have Steel Titan, but Whirlwind Staff is an attack skill, which means if you use it, you activate your guard effect, right? And you're not taking a hit in retaliation since it's a 1-point skill that does AoE damage. You know, Steel Titan, you're just bringing Steel Titan by itself, which is kind of iffy in my opinion. And then of course, Detect, I don't really like it myself. So that's why I recommend, of the 3 options, to bring Whirlwind Staff. Use it, then you have Steel Titan for 2 turns. And then, you know, when it cools down, you can use it again to regain Steel Titan. And then Estelle's final skill is Phoenix Wave. Okay. 5 cooldown, so it's one of those ultimate skills. Span of 3 blocks, so it's important to note it's 3 blocks, not 4. Range is self. What it does is deal 0.35 times AoE damage to all enemies within 3 blocks. In addition, before being cast, dispels all debuffs casted on you. After battle, restores 100% hit points, grants Steel Titan and immunity for 2 rounds. Amazing skill, long story short, right? If you're damaged, you use it, you go back to full hit points, right? You get Steel Titan effect, and you also get immunity for 2 rounds. So what is there not to like about it, right? So it's interesting to note that in this, Bracer, General, and Wave Crasher line, you have 2 skills, Skein Staff and Phoenix Wave, which grants you Steel Titan. So it's very easy for Estelle to maintain Steel Titan permanently. So in some ways, you can actually consider bringing just Skein Staff, and then Phoenix Wave, and then Detect. It can be considered. I personally don't like this combo, right? Because I'd rather remove Detect to bring the Whirlwind Staff to make sure you always have a skill to use, since Phoenix Wave has a 5-turn cooldown. So yeah, those are all her skills. So now let's talk about skill builds, shall we? It's actually kind of hard to design a skill build for Estelle. But PvP, it's pretty easy. It's what I just said. Whirlwind Staff is the first one. Second one is Skein Staff. And then the third one is Phoenix Wave. 3 AoE attack skills, all of them grant Steel Titan. There's this self-restoration, self-healing in the Phoenix Wave. And yeah, that pretty much sums it up. And you can use Skein Staff very easily because you can move up 3 blocks and hit a target 5 blocks away from where you moved. So that would be her PvP build. If you're talking about PvE build, in terms of skills, it gets a little bit more interesting, doesn't it? In PvE, you really want to one-shot enemy targets, right? So that means you really do want Armor Pierce, if possible. So what you probably end up doing is Armor Pierce, Skein Staff, right? And then the 1-point skill is kind of up to you. You could actually bring Steel Titan if you think you're likely to, not have the Steel Titan buff all the time. Or you could bring Whirlwind Staff, right? So one or the other. Alright, so those are her skill choices. The thing I forgot to mention is how to fit in cheer, isn't it? That's kind of hard, it really is. But you may consider giving up Skein Staff, right, in favor of cheer. In that case, you have to be aware that during that turn you're doing cheer, you can only guard within 1 block of her. But cheer being, it stacks on top of a faction buff and attack command, it really does have utility. So worth considering how you can fit this skill in, if you can. Alright, so that is her skills. Now, let's talk about her soldiers, shall we? So, soldiers-wise, from the training ground, she gets these 3 soldiers here. Zealots, Berserkers, and Heavy Centurion. Okay. In terms of, from her classes, right, she gets Valix and Exorcist from the Sakura Supreme. And then on this side, on the right side, she gets Amazon Champions and Heavy Infantry. So, pretty good mix of Holy, Lancers, and Infantry soldiers. It is important to note though, she herself, Estelle, is a Lancer class. So, keep that in mind. The best units for her? Well, as a tank, theoretically, Phalanx is the best, right? Decreasing the amount of physical damage you take. But it's slightly interesting for Estelle because she is very frequently an offensive tank, right? Attacking with this skill, Armor Pierce. So because of that, you might have to consider sometimes using her other soldiers, like Heavy Centurion, because Heavy Centurion, when attacked, attack and defense increase by a certain percentage, right? And then similarly, Amazon Champions, when attacking, attack is increased by a certain percentage. And there's also a chance to decrease the enemy's defense, right? So if you're using her very offensively, Amazon champions are worth considering. Same with Phalanx, same with Heavy Centurion. In addition, you might switch occasionally to the infantry soldiers if you think you're going to use Estelle to attack enemy lancers, right? The situation there, of course, is that there has to be no cavalry on the map, because otherwise the cavalry is going to rip up those soldiers of hers very quickly, whether it's heavy infantry or berserkers. Finally, zealots, in my opinion, not really. Zealots and exorcists aren't really her best units. But once again, they're like a swapping in unit if you're facing nothing but holy enemies. Or sorry, nothing but demon enemies, right? So all these soldiers can be used. Again, it's a matter of whether you have them leveled up because of the training ground, right? Training ground being by far the longest grind, right? Given that you have not only the soldiers to level up, but also these techs that cap at level 20 that needs a lot of SSR items too. Given that's the case, at this stage in the game, you're probably going to stick with, let's say, one soldier type per branch, right? So that means you'll probably just have Phalanx at level 9 or level 10, and there's no way you're going to use, heavy Centurions as a result of that, or the other soldier, Amazon champions, as a result of that. Even if you had, let's say, level 10 Phalanx and then level 5 heavy Centurions and level 5 Amazon champions, it still makes Phalanx by far the best unit to use, given that they get plus 30% stats, whereas units at level 5 only get plus 12%. So just keep that in mind, basically. Similarly for infantry, it's the same thing, right? You might have heavy infantry leveled up, and in that case you could use them, but you probably won't have berserkers leveled up. And as for the holy branch, same kind of situation. You might have zealots leveled up if, let's say, you use Chris, right? But you probably won't have exorcists leveled up, and as a result, the unit choice when you do switch to a holy unit is obvious. Alright, so we've talked about her soldiers. Let's talk about her bonds now. Estelle's bonds are, in a lot of ways, just like Joshua. Her 4th and 5th bond unlock from her classes, which is why the main reason for, if you use her, you need to commit 2 runestones into her. Otherwise, you're going to end up with 15% less, hit points, defense, and magic defense, or 15% attack missing. That's a huge amount of stats to be missing. So if you're using her, you're going to double class mastery. You can't afford not to double class mastery. Okay. With that said, her 3rd bond increases hit points and defense. So that's really common amongst Lancer tanks, and it's really the best value that Lancer tanks can get in general. Especially since, Lancer tanks usually don't absorb magic attacks, right? So they don't particularly need magic defense, and if they do get hit by magic attacks, they're generally screwed. So just to keep in mind, she has very good hit points, very good defense, but she's very vulnerable to magic attacks. Alright, so with all that said, we're going into the final portion of this video, which is talking about her gear and the enchant that she runs. Estelle, in terms of enchants, is quite interesting. For most tanks, you would prefer to run things like Hard Rock, right? Or Steel. Because, for example, Hard Rock gives you, when hit points is below 50%, 50% to restore, 15% hit points, right? Steel would increase your hit points by 10% and reduce damage taken by 10%. But in the case of Estelle, because she is such an offensive character, using skills all the time, her best options, believe it or not, are, in my opinion, actually Clocks or Breeze. And the reason for Clocks or Breeze is, let me just quickly bring up another character and to show the enchants, right? So the reason I recommend Clocks is because she's always using skills to attack enemies, right? So Clocks, when dealing skill damage, 30% chance to decrease cooldown by 5. This would combo incredibly well with her Phoenix Wave skill. If you can use Phoenix Wave multiple times, restoring back to full health and so on, that would be amazing. So that's why Clocks is a great enchant for her. Other than Clocks, right, Breeze would have utility because of her lack of mobility, being at 3 movement, right? So Breeze, giving the chance of getting +2 movement, raises her movement up to 5, allowing her to more easily get into combat with the enemies. So that's why, as an offensive tank, I actually recommend one of those 2 enchants. Now, those enchants are obviously more idealized towards PvP than for PvE, right? In PvE, you might still have to consider steel and, the usual tank enchants instead. But if you're doing PvP with Estelle, it would be Clocks or Breeze, and it's kind of up to you. Alright, so with all that said, let's bring up the Google Sheet to talk about her best equipment. And here we are. Okay, so since both her classes are Lancer, she's limited to, well, axes and to lances, right? If you're using her for PvE, the gear doesn't matter as much. You can run the standard PvE gear, right? Jägersil Branch, because it can ignore some of the enemy's defense, right? You can run armor-wise, well, if she's like your first tank that you're building, you'll probably have Aeneas' armor on her. And then you'll probably have Aeneas' helmet on her, because these items are free. And then for her accessory, it would probably end up being King's Amulet, because again, another free item, right? But if you're starting to build her for PvP, building her custom set of gear, then her equipment starts to change, okay? Because in PvP, she's a damage dealer with tanking ability, but primarily still a damage dealer, you want to maximize her attack. Thus, instead of using lances, you're looking at the axes, right? So, axes, there's 4, right? Throne Guardian, Ragnarok, Peacemaker, and Devil Axe. 3 of them, Ragnarok, Peacemaker, and Devil Axe, kick in when you attack an enemy. But Estelle doesn't really attack. She's more, for PvP, she's using her AoE skills, right? Whirlwind Stick, Skein Staff, and Phoenix Wave. So since she is using AoE targeting skills, the best weapon ends up being, by default, Throne Guardian, which gives the plus 10% attack and 5% hit points, right? Because otherwise, these 3 will never kick in. So that's why these 3 aren't that good for her. Instead, it's Throne Guardian by default. Alright, so that's her best weapon for PvP. For armor, well, Bloodline Magic Armor is a great choice for her because what is there to say? I mean, Bloodline Magic Armor, you get the 30% chance to decrease the damage you take by 30%. This far and away is one of the best armors in general. She could also use Aeolus's, right? Because she is very vulnerable to magic attacks, and Aeolus can reduce magic attack damage. But in general, I would say Bloodline Magic Armor is the best for her, right? There is also the choice of Mirror Armor as a side note, right? Because Mirror Armor can counter Last Rites, dealing the fixed damage to the enemy before a melee attack. But it's something you have to consider, I guess. Whether you give her Bloodline Magic Armor, Mirror Armor, or Aeolus's. Helmets, okay? Helmet-wise, I would say her best helmet is probably Vampire Mask. It's kind of hard to say, but I would say it's probably Vampire Mask. Just to increase her defense a bit, and also have the chance to decrease the defense of an enemy within 2 blocks of her, right? I mean, the other ones are more like, they buff hit points, right? So they can be used, don't get me wrong. You definitely don't want Carbon Fiber Helmet though, because the chance of your hit points dropping below 50%, it's not that likely, I don't think. So, yeah, my personal opinion is Vampire Mask, but really, any helmet can kind of work for her. I don't think she's that picky about it. Reaper's Breath would definitely not be one that is good for her in general, because the PvP build the PvP build of Estelle is about using these AoE attacks, and she's not likely to be the one eliminating enemies. So, no Reaper's Breath. Otherwise, she's kind of use whichever one you want. You could even use Chief's helmet. Okay, so that's her helmet. Pretty wide variety, kind of up to you in all honesty. And as for the accessory, well, her best accessory, it's probably going to be an accessory that increases her movement. Probably, you know. So for example, Apex boots giving +1 mobility and the plus attack would be great for her, right? Important to note that it increases magic defense, which is not really a stat that she needs exactly, but something to keep in mind. Apex boots would work quite well on her, you know, eliminating some of her mobility issues. Another great accessory is, as always, Overlord's Badge. You can never go wrong with an Overlord's Badge because of the immunity effects, right? Immune to defense debuff, immune to attack debuff, immune to mobility reduction, all of those help a tank like Estelle. Okay? So that's another great item for her. I would also say both Spirit Boots and the other boots, where is it? Divine Boots would also be great for her, right? These ones increase defense and hit points, right? Increasing her survivability. So she doesn't do as much damage now because these don't increase attack. But the mobility definitely helps, right? Yeah. Especially Spirit Boots in particular. Because Spirit Boots, allowing you to move 2 blocks after attacking a target, means that, if I go back into the game, Estelle's talent of buffing allies within 1, 2, 3, or 4 blocks, 1, 2, or 3 blocks of her will have a higher chance of kicking in, right? So she's actually surprisingly versatile in the accessory you pick as well. You know, if you pick those Spirit Boots, then she can attack and retreat and then buff allies, but she herself does less damage. If you give her Apex Boots, she has higher mobility to get into combat range and do more damage, right? And remember, with Estelle, increasing her attack, as I recall, does help increase her defense due to Steel Titan, right? And so yeah, in a lot of ways, her equipment is surprisingly versatile. It's actually truly quite hard to say what her best accessory and helmet is. So you'll have to make a decision there. But I absolutely do recommend an axe, the Throne Guardian, for her weapon. Because at the end of the day, she's more of a damage dealer than she is as a tank. Which means you definitely want more attack as a result of that. Alright, so that's everything I wanted to say about how to build Estelle. I'm sorry I couldn't give you like a 100%, you know, very obvious set of gear for Estelle. It's just because she's one of those characters that are a bit more versatile than other characters. It all depends on how you build her, whether as a purebred damage dealer or more as a support Estelle. So it's up to you to decide which kind of Estelle you want to build. Alright, thanks for watching everyone. And on that note, Nitro out.